Welcome back and good evening if you've just joined us. This is Africa News and Network. My name is Cindy Mabi and our top story this hour: never let the truth get in the way of a good story or facts in the way of a skewed review report, especially when they are uncomfortable. Now, ANN7 today narrates a story that seems good till you see it in the light of facts.
The story of a ministry out to persecute a state-owned enterprise. Stay with us for the next 60 minutes as we unravel layer by layer the web of deceit that is being weaved as the helpless victim cries out for help.
Now, the protagonists in this saga of deception are the Treasury and Eskom, and the stories of a draft report on the power utilities contract with Tegeta Exploration and Resources. In June 2015, the Treasury began a review of the coal contract, and several leaks and controversies later, Eskom has not been fully heard. The report has been sent to third parties, and the state-owned entity has almost been branded guilty without being given a proper chance to prove their innocence.
Staring at doom, some voices at Eskom have decided to speak out, and we get you the details of their desperate pleas.
You're welcome to join us on social media. It's at ANN7 TV, at I am Cindy Mabi, at
Clive R.A. Smith.
Not Halala.
No, not Halala, no.
Okay, let's get the details now. Our colleague Audrey Chimwanda is standing by as ANN7 now unravels how the Treasury is drafting this report, and it has shown complete disregard for some very valid objections raised by Eskom. Let's take a look.
A very good evening to you, Cindy, Clive, and our guests, of course, our viewers at home. As you have mentioned, we are on a fact-finding mission, and this is what we have managed to come up with. Eskom is objecting the draft report. They say it is still in the process of collating additional information as requested by Treasury in March, and yet Treasury went ahead and finalized this draft report, which was leaked to the media, by the way. Treasury's giveaway response in this instance is the findings raised in the report are based on information received from Eskom since June 15, turning a blind eye on the objections as well of Eskom and making it very clear that whatever questions they had actually given to Eskom to respond will not be taken into consideration in this draft report, which they finalized and that then appeared in the media. The intention, Treasury bent on finalizing the report without considering full facts that are relevant to the probe. Taking a look once again at Eskom's objections, they say the conclusions reached in Treasury's draft compliance report are patently flawed. Treasury's giveaway response in this case is the final conclusion in the report is suggesting a forensic investigation. If you'll take particular note to the language used by Treasury here, they call it a final conclusion. Never mind the fact that Eskom at this point haven't finished collating the evidence and the information that is needed by Treasury to be able to finalize this report. Treasury goes on to say Eskom should initiate such investigation to press charges for financial misconduct, even criminal charges based on the outcome. It gives away the intention that Treasury has pre-decided the final conclusion in the draft itself. Perhaps if they had a misunderstanding with the Eskom's recommendations or their response, they could have called a meeting so that they can have some kind of understanding with regards to the information having been provided by Eskom itself. Eskom's objection, once again, that the conclusions reached in Treasury have an issue. Also, the findings are consistent with the PwC report that was commissioned by Eskom itself. Treasury goes on to say they have a problem with the claim. Treasury selectively takes note of PwC's review and ignores Eskom's implementation. Also, a report from PwC having noted whatever problems Eskom could have had in their financial flows and to see if Eskom actually went back and implemented the recommendations by PwC itself. We do not see this coming from the Treasury. Selective reading meant to create this perception of irregular processes by Eskom itself. Treasury's claim goes on to say advance payment to Tegeta highly inconsistent with provisions of Treasury regulations and contract management practices. Eskom goes on to object this finding by Treasury. They say, how has Treasury come to a finding without necessary and the relevant facts coming from Eskom itself, an understanding of how the process of a supply contract works and the relevant facts when even the public protector with the volumes of information couldn't come up with a conclusion. If you remember, the public protector state of the capture Treasury report also couldn't come up with a conclusion with regards to the Eskom Tegeta contract information. The intention here to forge a perception of irregularity once again around the advance payment which had been given by Eskom. Also finding out that Eskom has actually made similar advancement to other companies. This has not come out in the Treasury report as well. Back to you, Cindy.
Thanks so much, Audrey. Of course, this is a debate or discussion that Amabongane would probably want to watch. We joined in studio by Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, Siso Mahlangu, resident political analyst. Themba Gordy is from Scopa and APC president. Cecilia Russell is 8 and 7 special projects editor. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. I think maybe I'd like to do things in bite sizes, where this thing emanated from, and that where it brings us is the fact that Eskom is decrying the fact that they are being smeared, there's corruption allegations, and yet they weren't given the opportunity to depose and to question the submissions made. So Tsepo, in your view, what is at play here?
Well, I think there's a lot at play. Well, maybe let's just go into recent history, and that is starting in 2014. 2014, we saw a Eskom that was almost under siege. The then chairman, Mr. Zola Tsotsi, of course, his chairmanship, I think was extended, albeit for a very short period of time. And at the time, the company had an acting CEO, did not have a CEO. With the very premature departure of the former DG of, I think, Trade and Industry, who's now at the National Planning Commission. So it was really a very difficult period for Eskom. And we saw load shedding. At the time, we saw that Eskom, amongst other things, was forced effectively to spend billions of rands, more than 10 billion rand, on procuring diesel to keep the two combined cycle turbine power stations, both Gorikwa and Ankerleg in the coast. And the amount of money that they were spending there just meant that effectively Eskom was going to go bankrupt very quickly. And then with all of those changes, we saw a situation we now know as a matter of history that another key supplier of coal, who in fact controls coal supplies into Eskom, is a company called Glencore, who now we know that they had been negotiating with the then management of Eskom, which were all interim people largely. They were negotiating with them to increase their price from optimum colliery to supply coal, which is contracted up till 2018, I think until September or November, at a fixed price of 150 rand a ton, and that they were now demanding, and they had produced some report which somehow miraculously they'd convinced the then management of Eskom that they deserved to earn 450 rand a ton. And during all of that period, of course, we know that Minister Lynn Brown, almost every day when we were having load shedding, she was telling us that, in fact, the situation was so dire that there were no more than 3 months of cash flows left to run Eskom. Now, through all of that, we know that, as a matter of fact, that in December of 2014, Cabinet established what is called a war room. And the war room was headed by none other than the Deputy President of the Republic, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, who is also a head of government business. And I remember at the time commenting that taking into account that he was still in the process of winding down his business interest to sell them into what they term a blind trust, was it not proper, or would it not have been prudent had it been that Mr. Ramaphosa should have declined to be the leader of government business? And the reason I'm giving this history, by the way, is very important, because we saw then that during the time that he was running the war room, or he was chairing the war room effectively usurped power from the board, duly constituted board of Eskom, that they were making decisions. In fact, the management of Eskom were spending no less than 3 days a week attending war room meetings instead of generating electricity. And in all of that backdrop, of course, we saw also there were these independent power producers who also were saying, listen, it's going to be lights out. We need short-term or medium-term power purchase agreements of 3 to 5 years. And those companies, the war room instructed that despite the management of Eskom at the time, and I'm intimately aware of the facts, despite the management of Eskom at the time having reservations about this medium-term power purchase agreements from IPPs, the War Room gave an instruction as chaired by the Deputy President that come the 1st of April, those agreements had to be signed, and they were signed. 17th of April 2015, of course, Mr. Brian Molefe comes on board as the interim CEO. He's now seized with the situation that he found whereby they were told that the company was about to go bankrupt, and then he was told that you got to sign this agreement and sign it now, or else there's going to be blackouts, not just load shedding, the contract being what, of 450 rand. And that is the chief source of why we are where we are today. And there are big questions that have to be addressed, and it is imperative that people cannot just hide behind some investigative journalists out there without coming forth and really address these very pertinent issues, than whereby today Optimum is still supplying at 150 rand a ton until 2018. They are still liable for the 2 billion rand, which at the time Glencore wanted to avoid, and Glencore has never answered the question, why did they put the company into business risk? That was their decision. They can never apportion the blame on anybody. They are the ones and the only ones who could make such a decision. They made that decision that backfired very badly, and hence we sit in this situation.
Well, Tsepo, I mean, they can give explanations, Glencore, I'm sure, and I know that they might think that perhaps maybe Eskom was trying to sabotage them into business rescue, and maybe we'll clarify all those things as we continue with our discussion. But let's go back and speak to Mr. Themba Godi, who is the APC president, who joins us now live on the line, and top of the evening to you, and welcome to the show. You've heard Mr. Tsepo Khadima explain the historical background to this very difficult story, perhaps sometimes when people just give out information, perhaps without giving the actual evidence or the background story, it can easily then be determined to be something or somewhat of a one-sided or lopsided story. Can you give us your understanding of why it is that Treasury took something of a report which was not finalized and made it final simply because they had to deliver it not just to the public protector but also in their records as well as reason why there was a connection and a link to why Glencore Optimum came to be in the spotlight?
Thank you very much. Well, of course, my political background has taught me that we must seek the truth from the facts all the time. However, from the perspective of SCOPA, let me just give context. We had our interaction with the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer last year, and in their reports indicated that they were looking at some procurement cases in a number of SCOs, and we agreed that we'll need to have sight of those reports once they are done. This would have happened end of November last year. It did not take place. End of January, it didn't take place. And we only interacted with National Treasury last week, Wednesday, around Eskom. The other reports are still outstanding. And in the case of Eskom, we interacted with National Treasury purely on the basis of the PwC reports, not on the basis of the interim report that has been generated. And the PwC reports only deal with the Tegeta mining contracts. Now, we have seen the PwC reports of November 2015 and November 2016. We noted their findings, the root causes, the comments of management in the first instance, and in the second instance, the observations of PwC in terms of areas that have been attended to and areas that have not been attended to. Now, there has to be understanding that our interaction with National Treasury was to get information, tease out issues. But in terms of making a determination of whether there is guilt or not, right or wrong, we can only make that once we have interacted with Eskom. And we have duly decided that before the end of May, I think around the 30th of May or so, but we'll be communicating formally with Eskom.
All right, Mr. Godi, I beg your pardon. It's Cindy Mabi here. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. Let's just take it back. In your leadership or stewardship as the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, the process of engagement. Now, you referred to a PwC report, the latter and the former, but yet Eskom laments the fact that they haven't been given adequate time to even submit questions. As soon as Treasury had issued a list of areas that they needed to cover, while they were still collating this information, then a draft report, a compliance report was leaked. Again, there was a media frenzy suggesting that Eskom is corrupt generally and that there's something untoward about the Tegeta contract. Let me bring you back, mind you, with the PwC contract, the second one that you referred to, had highlighted the processes that have been fulfilled in terms of the areas that the auditing firm had concerns over. Do you feel that Eskom is within their rights to think that somehow there is a ploy, or, you know, be it from Treasury or be it from the public discourse, to tarnish the reputation of the leadership there?
Well, you see, the point I was making was that our interaction was really to tease out the issues. The question of right and wrong can only be determined once we've interacted with Eskom. Just as we do with the Auditor General. The Auditor General will come to us, talk about departments, make his findings, but it's only once we've interacted with the affected department and they're able to explain themselves that we're able to say, this is our perspective. Now, in relation to the issues you're asking me, Cindy, in relation to the public discourse, what people are saying and all that, I think from the perspective of SCOPA, we would not want to make any pronouncement of guilt or not guilt unless and until Eskom has been given the opportunity to explain themselves, just like we do with any other department. What other people say based on whatever sources they have, I think they should be able to justify that. But in terms of the proper parliamentary process, it is only when we have interacted with the affected party that we're able to say.
But one would suggest, Mr. Godi, that Eskom here is the most affected in the scenario, because Treasury, and based on the response back from Eskom on the non-compliance or compliance report, suggesting that you need to have a specific technical skill set to interpret contracts and base prices and how all of this works. But at the level of Treasury, the way they interpret it, it seems to suggest that the processes themselves in Eskom are not flouted, number one, and secondly, that there is untoward business going on there.
You know, I can assure you that even with the Auditor General, we do find ourselves sometimes in situations where departments, do question and challenge or have their own views about how the AG has gone about its work. Primarily, and correctly so, because we need to be able to hear the other side. I hear what you're saying, but I'm just saying that from a corporate perspective, I'll need to afford Eskom the opportunity to talk to us and to talk to the issues that are there. And I think our main interest is what PwC has said and how they respond to it. How Treasury interprets it can be their input when we're engaging with Eskom. The issue of public discourse, of course, many times we do get public discourse that might not be entirely informed for one reason or the other. But at the level of Parliament, we can and should only deal with facts. Facts as can be cross-examined, can be cross-checked, and be verified.
Yeah, Mr. Thembagodi, we hope that you'll keep on the line there as we continue the discussion here with our studio panelists. Sfisa, contracts are a very important and integral part of engaging with any party. I mean, we know this because you and I are both married, so you know the kind of contract you have to commit to, and even that contract, if it was to be cut short or to be ended, we know what would be the end results. in that particular case, it seems like there's a contract that was engaged with Tegeta, with Eskom, that Treasury has made a predetermination. And that's the reason, actually, why Eskom invited PwC, not the other way around. It was Eskom who invited PwC to say, listen, if there's any wrongdoing, please express it. This report sounds to me like PwC maybe, and this was what my colleague Cindy was trying to ask Mr. Gori, maybe there's a wrong, elaborate explanation of what that contract means and why then therefore it could be understood to be perhaps something that is not in line with what is supposed to be happening in the coal industry. So me, for instance, recently engaging in the coal industry, I would understand that perhaps maybe there were conditions set before it. But why would Treasury deliberately ignore Eskom's plea and directly go and submit something that is perhaps that could paint a wrong picture of the leadership at Eskom?
Well, we're happily married. She's married, I'm happy. Together we're happily married.
Yeah.
It is a contract indeed that I think deciphers some investigation. But I think the fact to understand is that Malisu Gigaba was not the minister when all of this was happening, when the draft report was released by Treasury, when the report of the public protector was released. And I hasten to say, even between Tegeta and the then head of Treasury, the former minister of finance, there was bad blood. I don't know, and I think many of us still wonder what the Minister of Finance had against the Gupta family, Oak Bay Investments, Tegeta, or even Eskom for that matter. But our treasury in this country, number one, is not owned by South Africa. It's owned by Goldman Sachs. And if anybody disputes me, the minister's office have the right of reply to prove who owns the treasury in this country. So there's always been a relationship that is antagonistic between Treasury and Eskom, and thus Treasury and Tegeta. So far as the Office of the Public Protector was used to lay allegations, we've seen with the State of Capture report, and I think from Treasury doing business with Eskom and Tegeta, allowed itself to play in a political game, but allowed itself to cast aspersions, and that is what it will do if Treasury allows itself, even at this point, to release a report that is rushed, if it has to release a report that is not factual, because that was what was happening in the previous administration. So Malisu Gigaba has only been in the office for a few weeks. I don't know if he's got all the details. A lot of the things that were happening in his absence before he joined office. I think what needs to happen at Treasury at this point is that there needs to be another investigation. There needs to be considerable action to say what was the relationship between Eskom and Tegeta, and for that matter,
investigations. Fiso, sorry, I hate to interrupt you. I just quickly want to, there's something that's bothering me. Mr. Gordy, just on the question on the PwC report, by the way, that Eskom had commissioned to say, come and look at our books. We'll provide you with the necessary information. There was at least a 90% scorecard that all the concerns had been addressed. So I don't know, from the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, whether this is something that you had ventilated thoroughly to ensure that Eskom is not brushed as this corrupt entity that is just hemorrhaging state funds.
No, yeah, well, we did note the fact that the PwC reports were actually commissioned by Eskom. And like I say, we noted the findings as well as the responses from management. I think there are a few issues around which, from where I'm standing, we may need to further, discuss with Eskom to clarify us in terms of how the contract was managed, how certain things were done or not done, to get explanation from them. And without them having done that, I don't think I'm in a position to say whether Eskom was right or wrong until they've had the opportunity to come before us and explain themselves or give context or give mitigating reasons on why certain things happened or why certain things did not happen. So I don't think I would want to say in this particular instance there was anything untoward or anything corrupt around how the contract was managed until Eskom has come before the committee. And if I were to say this here now on AN7, then it defeats the objective of us calling them and giving them the platform to explain to us with open minds and not go there with a closed mind and say, no, Eskom was right or Eskom was wrong.
And just on the compliance report itself, because Eskom again saying that all and sundry had a draft report from Treasury besides Eskom, and the agreement at the time, or the assurance, was the former finance minister saying they will at least send it to the public enterprises minister, then Eskom, before it is made public. We know that it was leaked, but subsequently there was another report that sounds final in the sense of its findings in terms of what they tried to make into evidence, which was not substantiated. So were you given the opportunity, or did you see the report at least of PwC?
Well, yeah, the PwC report, the original report, was original, as original can be. Yes, I had access to it. I've gone through it. That's why I'm saying the report has findings, root causes, as well as responses from management. That is the first one. The second one, which was a review of how Eskom has complied with the initial report, has indications of what Eskom has been able to comply with. It has indications of what might have lagged behind and the reasons given in each of those instances. So the leaked report that you're talking about, well, I haven't seen it. I've seen what was in the papers, but I would not even want to use a single fact from things that were leaked that were not sent formally to us, because then I think that can be problematic by itself. If National Treasury has a final report, because you'll recall when it appeared before us last week, there were serious controversies amongst members who wanted to know, is this the report that was leaked? Is it final? Is it preliminary? Because if it's not a final report, then what are we doing? If it is a leaked report, why are we, So I'm treating very, very carefully around things that are not formal, because we're talking about Parliament, and as Parliament, we need to maintain our integrity and interact with the institutions of state in a formal manner and not via informal process.
Mr. Gori, what about the implementation report that was submitted by Eskom themselves to explain what they're going to be doing, what the plans are to make sure that all the recommendations that were required at the point that they will be... Was that submitted together with that PwC report?
No, all we had were the two PwC reports. That's why I'm saying part of the problem that came by members was around the possibility of us having a preliminary report from National Treasury, because then that would be problematic. Now, the second PwC report does contain responses from Eskom in terms of the issues they have done and the issues that might be outstanding. And I wouldn't want to go into chapter and verse of, in this particular instance, this is what the report says, because that is what is going to be the subject of our discussions, I think, in 2 weeks' time.
That's very good. We're going to then head back to Audrey, who's going to be assisting us to try and see if we're still in line, and we're going to hope that Mr. Thembagodi just sticks with us. We also have AN7's special projects editor here with us. We want to hear from her as well as soon as after we've heard from Audrey. Audrey, we cross over to you.
Well, thank you, Clive. Of course, we continue to unravel, take a look at the facts, the responses from Treasury, and of course the concerns coming from Eskom as they have been going through the draft report and also trying to get this communication between Tegeta and also trying to get an understanding of the issues that they have between the two. And as we continue to unravel that, Treasury's draft report, we take a look at that. They say Eskom paid Tegeta more than the base price of 13.5 GJ for Brockfontein coal. Eskom goes out to point out the patent flaws that they say Treasury's statement is reckless. It ignores the contractual price adjustments for diesel. And also Tegeta faults Treasury as well, saying Treasury has completely overlooked the instances in the report when the actual price has been lower than the base price. And if you take a look at the response from Treasury, they actually state month by month the price that was charged by Tegeta to Eskom. You will see that the base price sometimes was actually higher than the normal price and lower. Of course, this having been affected by the diesel fluctuation price. That is not noted by the Treasury in this report. Treasury's draft report goes on to say Eskom signed an agreement expiring in 2025, even though the mining license expires in the year 2020. Eskom points out that Treasury ignored documents that set out the rationale for the 10-year contract. Also, if they had any issues, they could have tried to understand where Eskom, the decision that informed Eskom to actually extend this license for Tegeta to the 10-year contract. Tegeta faults Treasury as well, saying the mining rights for Brockfontein extension are valid until 2024 and can be extended. Also noting that just because a license expires doesn't mean Tegeta then their mining rights also expire at the same time, and the two should not then affect the whatever contract that Tegeta has with Eskom. Taking a look once again at the Treasury's draft report, over 660 million rand paid as an advance to Tegeta should be treated as loan, as money was not used for capacity augmentation. Eskom responds saying prepayment was done to mitigate the blackout risks. Also that Tegeta says advance was used to open new drag lines to increase production. Also an understanding of the supply contract coming from the Treasury seems to be lacking there. If they had an understanding of why this payment had been done to Tegeta from Eskom. We take a look once again at the Treasury's draft report. Non-compliant shipments were delivered to Majuba Power Station. Eskom points out that Treasury does not understand the difference between reject call and contract call, and that documents demonstrating that Eskom never paid for any of the rejected call was overlooked. Tegeta goes on to say only when a stockpile is approved by Eskom that the dispatch begins from the approved stockpile. Therefore, coal that has been rejected cannot be deemed as a compliant call or non-compliant call as well, because it hasn't gone through the purchase process. Gross violation of compliance to water licensing agreement. This is coming from the Treasury's draft report. Eskom pointing out that suspension or termination notices by the Water Department do not affect water use or the licenses, and nowhere in the agreement or the contractual obligations between Tegeta and Eskom do they talk about any issues of the water issues and how they should then either suspend or terminate the contract with Tegeta. Treasury's draft report goes on to say Brian Molefe or Matjela Koko knew or should have known about Tegeta's non-compliance audit by Water Department on the 30th of August of 2016. Eskom pointing out that it is a disingenuous claim as the audit was only signed off on the 20th of September in 2016. There's no way that Brian Molefe would have known that they had some water issues and how this could have affected their contract. Back to you, Cindy and Clive, as you continue to ventilate those issues coming from Eskom, Tegeta, and of course the Treasury.
Thanks so much, Audrey. And we join now by Special Projects Editor Cecilia Russell. Thanks so much, Cecilia, for your patience as well. I mean, there's arguments and counter-arguments. I think I've got a document, probably a 20-pager, where Eskom has responded to Treasury's what they called a patently flawed compliance report, issues around water license and the quality of coal and, you know, the Tegeta bailout, etc. Put us in the picture as to what the transgressions were on the part of Treasury, primarily when it comes to interpreting and also collating the necessary information to draft their report.
The Treasury started investigating the Tegeta matter a while ago, and they have compiled a report based on, well, they say it's based on, material that's been given to them by Eskom and they say that they had 2 independent people that looked at the material and came up with similar conclusions. However, they never went back to Eskom and said to Eskom, these are the allegations that we found. For example, the cost of coal seemed to have gone up and down over a period of time, and there was no sort of real complete explanation of this. There are obviously others around water, etc., as have been pointed out. So they never went back to Eskom and said to Eskom, Eskom, can you please respond to this? They promised that they would. They also said that they would not share this particular document with anybody until they had given Eskom a fair opportunity to look at the various allegations and then respond. Unfortunately, what happened was a draft report was shared with three organizations, the Public Protector, the Auditor General, and one other.
Scopa.
It was Scopa. It was also leaked to the general public, or somehow got into the general public domain. And so it sits at the moment with a whole series of untested allegations. It also then, in the interaction following that, Eskom has responded with this very long and involved document, which, I mean, if we could go into, you probably could write a thesis on it, really. But anyway, very long and involved document. And the language of the reply from Treasury to Eskom seems to suggest that they're saying that's all very well. We feel that our investigation is sound. We're not. You can bring up these matters. We may or may not. We may or may include them. There was apparently supposed to be a meeting today between Eskom and Treasury to ventilate some of these issues. But nevertheless, despite this, Eskom feels that the Treasury has come to the conclusion that a forensic investigation is needed, regardless of their input. So they feel that coming to that kind of conclusion is premature, because there's still a lot of different issues that need to be ventilated. So that's where we are in terms of the journalism of the story.
Yeah. Would it be wrong
Yes.
to have that particular report, that investigation you're referring to, a forensic investigation, just to clear the air? Would that be something that perhaps maybe would satisfy the likes of Mr. Tembagodi at Scopa and perhaps maybe the general public as well?
Yes, I'm very pleased, that Mr. Tembagodi is here, and he seems to be he seems to say that his committee has got an open mind and realizes that there are many complexities to the story. So I think that's very welcoming. But what I think is probably we must realize is that there is potentially, there's a Public Protector report, which the state of capture report, which is mired in some legal problems, but at some stage those legal problems are going to be resolved, and one of the suggestions and has been welcomed by Eskom amongst, and the minister even the other day on when she was talking about the return of Brian Molefe to Eskom, said that they would welcome a judicial commission of inquiry into this. So there is the potential of that. This would be yet another factor, a completely different forensic report. At some stage, government needs to go in one direction and choose something that will be satisfactory. A commission of inquiry is sometimes the best way, because all the issues and people are cross-examined in public. So it would be a satisfying way for everybody to be able to come to whatever conclusion there is.
Absolutely, and gather all the information so that we're all the wiser. Mr. Gordy, I just want to ask in terms of Glencore in this regard, because Eskom, for me, has been singled out as essentially being manipulated to favor the Gupta family. And, I even battle with colleagues in the industry when we debate these matters to say, but where is the evidence? And secondly, who's then to say that Glencore is crying wolf because they lost a lucrative contract that they've enjoyed over so many years. And when they were trying to negotiate for an increase in their supply of coal, that was denied. And that's why we see the turnaround now being essentially being blamed on Eskom, supposedly manipulating Glencoe out of a deal.
Yeah. Well, you know, Cindy, I very much sympathize with the discussion. But I feel a bit constrained because, you know, we still need to meet with Eskom for them to clear the issues. Now, our focus of engagement on the Tegeta contract will purely be around compliance methods, processes. The other policy issues or issues affected or related to policy that Eskom might have looked at in terms of a whole range of political and economic considerations, we will not venture into that. That is for the portfolio committee to deal with. We also would really not want to see a situation where a public entity and National Treasury, have public spares. If there is any role we can play is to try and they need to find each other. We've had this kind of cases with the Auditor General where there were this bad blood with some public entity, and we tried to say, no, look, let's deal with the issues and put other things aside. And in that particular instance, at least we're able to get things smoothed out, and people were able to work, dealing with facts and not other external issues that may cloud the facts and the issues. So even in this particular instance, that's why I'm saying we would want to approach it with an open mind so that we deal with the facts. And if in the process between Eskom and National Treasury there have been points where there were misunderstandings, I think as Parliament it's our responsibility to say how do we assist to clear those, because after all, National Treasury is the custodian of the PFMA. And public institutions rely and depend on the guidance and assistance of National Treasury. And in an atmosphere of mistrust, I think we miss the public obligation and move into other minefields that I think from my understanding are totally unnecessary.
Mr. Gori, just if I can oblige you there, this kind of investigation, this kind of in-depth analysis into the workings of a state-owned enterprise, normally, and I'm taking this out of what I saw with the SABC board and what you had to go through, questioning and trying to find out where the truth lies. In that case, and other cases as well, when it comes to state-owned enterprises, I see a trend that you investigate all contracts that the state-owned enterprises enters into. In this particular Eskom one, it seems like we are looking into one particular contract, and that is with Tegeta. Is there any reason why National Treasury perhaps has not asked of other contracts that Eskom has had engagements with other coal suppliers within the industry itself?
I hope Eskom is watching and they can take note of your question. And raise it up themselves when we engage with them. Like I said, when we met with the Office of the Public Procurement Officer, they reported to us that they were busy with certain reports, and we said, well, let's engage on those reports. On the question of why they chose particular reports and not others, well, we did not go into that, but I would imagine that it might be of interest for Eskom to find out. Like you say, with the SABC, with PRASA, we have had to, with the correctional services, we have had to go into a whole range of transactions to try and clear a number of issues. So in this particular instance, we don't know what the genesis and the rationale was, except to say, from our side, we said, well, we want to see those. If they deal with compliance matters, that is where our interest lies as GOPA. Policy issues, that's for the portfolio committee.
All right, we'll invite Tsepo Khadima to take us out of our misery, because we could say that this emanates from the erstwhile Public Protector's State of Capture report. that essentially was a compilation around Tegeta Gupta relationship, alleged relationship with the president, etc. That in that sense, it then has a myopic view at what could potentially be even a bigger problem of exploitation of state-owned entities. What's your view?
I mean, first I'd like to comment and say that we should take comfort that our country has got lawmakers such as Mr. Themba Godi, who indeed respects due process and constitutional rights of people. And I think the manner in which he explained that they are approaching this subject matter, for me, gives me a lot of cold comfort, because that is the responsible way of approaching it. So we must be thankful in that regard. But I think in terms of the debate and the issue at hand, there are much more bigger questions that actually we need to be considering, taking into account the importance of Eskom in our lives, all of us, and taking into account the decisions that have been made, that there is something that you can do about some of them, there is very little that you can do about. However, I think what I would like to hear is National Treasury coming up and showing, demonstrating that they have got subject matter experts who can investigate and ask the right questions in this regard. They have not been asking the right questions. I'll give you one example in point. A water use right. I want somebody to tell me why you need to wash coal that goes into an Eskom boiler, taking into account the geological setting we have in Mpumalanga, and that what would the washing of coal effectively do? I want to hear somebody who can tell me that. And why was it necessary for National Treasury to go and reflect on the issue of water use right, which is completely irrelevant? There are in many instances whereby they've been asking irrelevant questions, but also the narrow scope of their investigation, taking into account that here we have an Eskom that uses well over 100 million tons of coal a year. And when now you compare, so well, who actually is supplying 100 million tons of coal a year? What are the circumstances upon which the contracting was arrived at with all of those? There are a whole host of other issues. I give an example. Exxaro is a listed company. By their own account, when they were releasing their results 2 years ago, they were in fact thankful that they earned over 3 billion rand from a take-or-pay agreement of supplying coal into Medupi Power Station, but because of the delay in completion of and commissioning of Medupi, they then were receiving 3 billion rand without even delivering one wheelbarrow. And I'm astonished that nobody has looked and inquired and got horrified that 3 billion rand was effectively thrown away. People have not asked questions. How is it possible that we were spending 450 cents per kilowatt hour equivalent in burning diesel at the 2 power plants, which effectively created conditions of hardship? There are many more bigger questions. And if we reflect on the story that was raised by Amabungani, for example, again there you can see that there is, apart from them coming here and holding course in a debate, we will of course successfully hold course that they are effectively putting forward a paid narrative based on the nature of the company. Because the questions that they are asking, absolutely, they are alleging, for example, that there was a mine grab. And hence there's need for this investigation. You know, look at the Treasury investigation. It came from that allegation of a mine grab. But nobody has ever asked a question as to, well, why did that company end up being in business rescue, and what are the rules of business rescue? When you put a business in business rescue, you mean that I, as the owner, I no longer have the capacity financially to be able to have continuing operations. Therefore, I need somebody else. I need a white knight to come and save this day. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I cannot understand that how can anybody want to hold cause that there was a mine grab when the owner of the property or the asset is the one who gave those conditions. And if indeed this was not a viable operation, how come today the Eskom is still receiving coal at 150 rand? But also the bigger question is, Mr. Molefe is being vilified. The board of Eskom are being vilified. They are being vilified for refusing to pay 300 rand per ton more for coal that they said in terms of the contract they need to receive it at the 150 rand contracted price. What is the cost saving? What is the impact? We've clearly seen it in the financials of Eskom. So we have to look at the whole thing globally, and you cannot have an investigation that is cherry picking, that is targeted at any one enterprise without taking into account Who else is within the 100 million tons a year that is supplying Eskom? And what are the conditions? Some of the people have got 47-year agreements. And you tell me, in this country where we demand radical socio-economic transformation, black economic ownership, empowerment ownership in the mining industry is the most dismal. Mining companies are failing, and I'm challenging the big mining companies to prove that they have made progress, because they've made zero progress. And in that context, how can we still be sitting here not demanding radical socio-economic transformation, broaden black ownership, and then be focusing attention where it cannot take us forward as a country? It cannot make sure that the lights keep being on. And those are the key issues. Those are the much more bigger issues that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I mean, somehow you have to feel for Khulupa Siwe, spokesperson for Eskom, and trying in his very calm voice to explain these technical contracts and agreements that are in place, and even going further to say the report that Treasury, with all respect, has released, albeit that they say it's conclusive, is essentially flawed, it's reckless, it's irresponsible. But the Eskom voice is not being heard, Sfiso, because, I mean, you look at Glencore, this is no small fry. We're talking about a conglomerate, multinational.
Second biggest in the world.
Second biggest in the world. How can they then be muzzled by, a small group together to give over a business that would have profited them? I'm sure they would have fought not only through litigation to make sure that they keep the business. I think it was a deal that they had pushed Eskom too far and lost that particular gamble.
Well, one has to often question, Cindy, what does it benefit Treasury to just allow Eskom to compile a response? Why not give this SOE the opportunity to make their response, gather their facts, so that Treasury can compile a perfect report and say this is what Eskom has said, and test the facts. But when one rushes facts and rushes to sign a deal or to sign a report and say this is what we feel about Eskom, and Eskom has not supplied the facts, reminds me of the time the former public protector rushed to the court to release her state of capture report on her last day when President Zuma attempted to interject that. Often things get very political in this business environment in this country. Some days back, reports circulating in this country was the former minister of mineral resources, has now hit to say he was put under pressure to give Eskom business, put under pressure to make this big conglomerate company pay Eskom. If one would just look at the financial reports of Eskom for the year 2016, for the year 2015, for the year 2014, one would come to the simple conclusion that Eskom was going to be bankrupt. They were 3 months from being bankrupt. How can any person who is a CEO not call the client to say, can you just pay me so that we can continue to run as a company, so that we can continue to run as an organization? I don't know what is meant by pressure when CEOs order their money from the companies that owe them. I think moving forward, Treasury must begin to detach itself from the political games and say to Eskom, you are an SOE in this country, a big one. We are granting you the opportunity to compile your report, to compile your facts, and we will respond in due course. However, if that doesn't happen, we've got on record what the SCOPA chair has said. I do hope that SCOPA moving forward will also allow Eskom to respond meaningfully so that they can keep their lights on. But what this particular story has shown South Africa today is the malicious intent of Treasury to blacklist Eskom or to crush the SOE. I think that part is evident.
So are you also of the view that Treasury is out to get Eskom, and what would be the benefit or rationale for these state entities?
Me? Oh yes, I think that Treasury and Eskom have had a bad relationship. I don't know whether the bad relationship is going to continue over a whole variety of things. First of all, Eskom flexed its muscles over certain things like the IPPs and what have you. The other reason is that they Brian Molefe in particular is rather independent-minded about what he wanted to want and his solutions. I think there's lots of history around this, and I think that what we've got is this report that is a kind of a hangover from that bad relationship, and hopefully there can be some positive things going forward. But the relationship is fraught. But the terribly scary thing about the letter from Treasury to Eskom is it's almost as though we've come to this conclusion. This is what is needed. We're going to discount your additional view, your perspective, your inside view, and we're going to make sure that you follow.
Special Project Editor,
yes,
unfortunately, I'm out of time. And my sister Cindy and I, we tried to squeeze everyone in. And we want to thank everybody indeed. We want to thank Scopa Chair there, Mr. Temba Koti, who joined us on the line. We want to thank Mr. Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, Mr. Swiso Mahlangu, who's our resident political analyst, and obviously not forgetting Cecilia Russell, who is our special projects editor as well. It's been a fantastic discussion. We hope it has helped us understand the intricacies behind this mining contract, and hopefully it will all be reached to conclusion soon as they sit in front of Parliament. Right now, there's time for us to take a short break, and we'll be back after this. Do it.
Second half.